the cloud. Okay, the session has started recording, and good evening, and wherever you are, how to set boundaries. This session today is how to set boundaries, the power of saying no, which I think is very, very important. And it's not just no that we have to say, but just sometimes we have to say, I can't do that, or we have to look after ourselves. So boundaries can mean different things to different people, but for now we'll concentrate on the main sort of biggest one. But this is such a huge topic, but we'll concentrate on some of what boundaries looks like and what you can do. So for those of you, I think most of you know me here already, but I'm Rosemary Wilson. I am the founder of Pragmatica Coaching, which is a coaching training company, and I do some consultancy work as well. And my focus areas are career-focused women who want to thrive in what they do or take the next step. So they want to be more confident, boundary setting, imposter syndrome. Those are some of the areas that I cover or help women with. But I also run workshops and talks for organizations who are committed to investing in their employees while supporting a culture of diversity and inclusion. So if you are joining me on the call, I can't see who's coming in. So if you want to connect with me, just use your phone to take a snapshot of that QR code, which will take you to my LinkedIn profile. And also you can use the LinkedIn link there, Rosemary with a Y Wilson, Rosemary Y Wilson, that's my middle name. And just to differentiate me from the other Rosemary Wilsons on LinkedIn. I've added author in there because I've just finished my first book. The book is for a corporate learning platform, and it's on imposter syndrome. So that will be out later on this year, probably close to November. But I've just finished it and it's being reviewed at the moment. So just a little bit about me. I think most of you have met me before. So today's content, I'm going to be talking about some of the basics of boundary setting. Now, obviously, these are from my perspective and my experiences from the people I work with, the people I speak to, my own life. I've pulled together these examples for you, and hopefully I'll be able to share them, good examples with you, so you understand what I'm saying. So we'll talk about the basics of boundary setting. I'm going to be talking about the guilt cycle, which is quite interesting because many people say yes and do things because they feel guilty, they feel bad. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. For me, boundary setting is about looking after yourself, and self-care isn't selfish. We must look after ourselves and set boundaries as much as possible. And just to make sure we've got a balanced life is more, not just because you want to be mean or spiteful to anyone, but just because you want to look after yourself. So self-care is important. And the power of no. Sometimes people think that by saying no, they're losing out on something, but actually it can be a strength. So I want to share a little bit about that as well. And then we'll open up for Q&A once the session is finished, and then we can all freely speak and share. So, so before we go into the basics, well, these are some of the basics as well. So when it comes to boundary setting, you can have personal boundaries and external, let's call them external boundaries. So for me, if you don't set your own boundaries, someone else will set them for you. So what do I mean by that? If you don't know what you will say yes to, what you'll say no to, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, somebody else will do that for you. So it's really, really important to set your boundaries. And it can be a long thing, as in it can be something that changes over time, but that's also okay. Just because you set a boundary this year doesn't mean that you have to have the same boundary next year. The important thing is it's your boundary. Don't let someone else tell you where your boundaries lie. So your boundaries are personal, so that's internal, and I'll talk about what that looks like in a second. And your boundaries can be in a work setting, so a professional setting, and it can be with your friends and family, because friends and family, they're there to push our buttons, and the people at work are there to push our buttons if we allow them to. So that's really important. Boundary setting really does help you, stops you from having your boundaries set, your buttons pressed. So I'll share more about that in a second. And when you have boundaries, it sets expectations for yourself so you know what you can expect from yourself and others. So don't allow other people to cross over those expectations and that awareness. If you think of any questions whilst I'm speaking, if anything comes to mind, just quickly jot it down, either on a piece of paper, on your phone, or ask the question in the chat box, and I will get to it. So personal boundaries, your personal boundaries, they can look like different things, and because they're personal, they're yours, so it's up to you. But for me, personal boundaries really do start with your self-worth. What do you think of yourself? How much value do you place on yourself? How much value do you allow other people to cross your boundaries? And if you don't know what your boundaries are, people will be crossing them all the time. But it does speak to that sense of self-worth, which is quite important, and about respecting yourself. So I'm not going to go into this, but, personal boundaries like, I don't know, inappropriate behaviors, risky behaviors, that's a different story, going out, being, I don't know, getting drunk, say, for instance, just for argument's sake, just to think of that, and then people taking advantage of you. That's kind of where you're not having that balance with respecting yourself. And people do this because of what's happened to them in the past, or childhood behaviors, childhood conditioning. So it's really important to have a look at that. How are you respecting yourself? And not just with your behaviors, but the things that you do for yourself. You have a responsibility to look after yourself. We only get one life, and each day is important to look after yourself and what you do and how you plan going forward. And honoring deadlines, so honoring your own deadlines. So if you say you're going to do something, or you say you're going to help someone do something, honoring deadlines, for me, that's a personal boundary for me. If I say I'm going to do something for someone, I always stick by it. But that's really important to me. It might not be important enough for you, but these are the types of things I'm talking about when it comes to personal boundaries. You have to explore them for yourself to know what they are. And for me, sticking to what you say is also a personal boundary. So these are examples of personal boundaries. So for instance, if you say I want to be in bed by 10 o'clock, but you consistently keep going to bed at 1 a.m., then you're not honoring your own deadlines. You're not honoring what you've said to yourself. If you say you're going to exercise, that you only manage to do it once a year, that's not honoring and respecting yourself from my point of view. And I know that these things happen. We fall off the ladder, we get caught up in work. But if it's a consistent thing that you're not looking after yourself, then that probably needs some kind of maybe intervention or conversation, either with having a conversation with yourself. I call it taking yourself to one side, having a word with yourself, and being more caring is what I'm looking for. And that's the self-care portion. Hugging and loving yourself is the sentiment here, because we want other people to love us, but yet sometimes we don't love ourselves, we don't look after ourselves. So there's some examples of what personal boundaries might look like. Today I'll be focusing quite often on the external boundaries of what, saying no to other people, or putting your foot down when it comes to other people. So the basics of boundary setting for me is that when you set your boundaries, it should be without malice. So what I mean by without malice, it should be without any spite or any disrespect or any kind of nastiness behind it. It's just a firmness in knowing yourself, so that you don't have to be angry or mad at setting your boundaries. They're your boundaries. You believe in them. They're about your self-worth. So there's no need to be malicious with that boundary setting. So you do it without malice. You do it with respect. You do it with fairness. So whether that's yourself or for whether that's internal or external boundaries, think about fairness. And self-care, again, that's looking after yourself and making sure that other people don't take advantage of you. And I've put optional, with or without boundary, with or without reasons. When you set your boundary, sometimes you might say to someone, I can't do that. And it's up to you whether you want to tell them the reason why you can't do something. Sometimes it's none of their business, quite frankly. Sometimes you just say, I can't do that. Doesn't fit in with my values, or, but that doesn't fit in with my value is a reason. But you could just say, I don't want to do that. It's not something I want to do. But the more you do this, the better you get at delivering this news. And sometimes people will take offense. I'll talk about that in a second. Some people will take offense because you said no to them, or you said, I can't do this, or I can't go out with you. I can't do that piece of work. Some people will take offense, but that's up to them. So whether you give reasons or not is entirely up to you. I don't always provide, if I said no to someone, I don't always provide reasons. And people sometimes think it's rude, but it's my personal thing. It's none of your business, because I might be doing something private. I don't have to share that with you. So it's up to you whether you decide to tell someone why you said no or why you can't do something. I think that's quite important as well, for you to have that as something to think about. Now, to note, when you say no to people, you don't want to do something, and maybe it's because you've been doing it for so long, people start to dislike that because you've stood up to them, or you've said no, or they can no longer perhaps get away with what they've been asking you to do. So friends and family, managers, colleagues, this happens everywhere. It's nothing new. And people, partners, doing the washing, for instance, if suddenly you say, right, no, I'm not doing the washing anymore, your partner might get upset that you're not doing that anymore because you've been doing it so for so long. So they might not like it, they might dislike it. So it's up to you to have that conversation why you're not doing that again. But people might dislike it depending on what's going on. And because you're no longer responding in the way that they want or expect you to. So all of a sudden they're like, whoa, why are you not doing this anymore? I've asked you to do this. You've been doing it for so long. So it's quite important to have that conversation. If you've been doing something for a while and you decide to step back, I think it can be, depending on the environment, can be quite important to tell that person, to communicate with that person or that group why you're no longer doing the thing that you've been doing for quite some time, so that they understand where you're coming from. But if people take offense, deep offense, after you explained or communicated with them, they might have their own challenges. And they won't realize that sometimes that them being offended or the way they react might affect their behavior and their relationships. Because some people, they say no, they get angry, they get upset, and they might be agitated and have be rude towards you. And that affects, their behavior and their relationships, and it might be going on with other people. And the important thing is, it's not your problem how they react. As long as you've set your boundaries, you've communicated it with them, how they behave, how they choose to behave is not your problem. And sometimes we can feel guilty because of the way somebody else is reacting, but it's not your problem. They might have their own issues, their own challenges, something else going on with them that they need to sort out. So it's not your problem. So that's just really important for you to note. Don't take on someone else's reaction as your problem, which leads us into guilt. So sometimes you feel guilty when you say no, you set your boundaries, and you feel uncomfortable. You feel a little bit, I don't know if I should have said that. Because you're setting your boundaries and things have changed for you, you start to feel a little bit guilty that you're not helping someone anymore, or you're not doing what you used to do. But I really think that guilt is one of the most useless emotions ever, because it just takes the fun out of everything, right? It often serves no purpose, because quite often you feel guilty about something that happened in the past, something that you feel that you should be doing when it's not really your responsibility. So it doesn't really serve any purpose. I often hear people speaking about, they ate, 16 cakes, or not cakes, 16 biscuits or something, and then they feel guilty. I'm like, if you're going to feel guilty about eating those cakes, or biscuits, or whatever, maybe you did eat 16 cakes, but the cakes have gone. Eat the cakes and enjoy the cakes. Don't feel guilty about having the cakes. It is just useless to get upset with yourself after doing that. Just make sure you've got more things in place so it doesn't happen again in the future. But forgive yourself. Guilt is sometimes the most useless emotion ever. Unless you've done something criminal or fraudulent, that's a different story. Then you should feel bad. But really, guilt does stop your focus, because you're spending time feeling guilty about something, and it stops your focus and stops your enjoyment and halts your enjoyment. So just think about that guilty factor And don't attach yourself to this guilt as much as you have done, or sometimes do, if it's something that you do. And one of the most pressing things when we're talking about making people feel guilty is family and friends. Family often make you feel bad about not doing something, and friends often make you feel bad about doing something, or you feel guilty because you feel a responsibility to them. And it can be sometimes it can be difficult to set boundaries with family, because they expect something from you and they say, we're family, it's like a blackmail, it's like a bribe. We're family, so you should do X or you should do Y. But I think there's a misconception when it comes to family, that not having boundaries set with them is allowed. I think there's a misconception. Family and friends and professional at your working environment, we're all humans. So as long as your communication is effective, you tell your family about the boundaries you're setting with them. And if it's up to them, again, not your problem if they don't accept the boundaries that you set. So there's this misconception that family and friends can take advantage of you. No, that's not true. I don't subscribe to that. We could probably have a big discussion about family and friends, because this is probably one of the heartfelt ones. But for me, if someone's treating you badly, it's not your job to accept it. It's a personal thing. And I think it's important to consider the impact on your relationship if someone is treating you badly, whether it's a family member, a friend, or a work colleague or a manager. Think about the impact on your relationship if someone's taken advantage of your goodwill, especially when they're overstepping your boundaries. And it's up to you to decide and choose where or how far you want to go with that person when it comes to your boundary setting. And it's not black and white, I know this, but sometimes we can feel a little bit manipulated in saying yes and no to things because we feel guilty, or because of the connection we have with them through blood or through friendship or through work, through your salary sometimes. But it is important to draw that line in the sand and decide and choose where and how you accept anyone overstepping your boundaries. I hope that makes sense. And when it comes to your work environment and boundaries, obviously you're in work and you have to do a certain amount of work or a certain type of work to be paid. So you will have signed up, when you got your role, you would have signed up to a job description or a role description. And in effect, that is an agreement. And I know some of you may get into the situation where you have a job description, but your role suddenly doesn't look anything like that job description. But again, in setting your boundaries, it's up to you to define what your role looks like. Otherwise, you're going to be asked to do lots of different things that are actually out of your jurisdiction. So it's up to you to, if your work environment cannot supply you with a decent job description, I think it's up to you to take the power back and define it for yourself and say yes, say no, and set your boundaries. Now, creating agreements and job descriptions, roles, but in general, it sets expectations. So if you know what your role is clearly, then it sets expectations for people asking you to do things. And you can say, no, this is not in my job description. This is my clearly defined job description, whether you've defined it for yourself or it's defined in your work environment. And if you say no, because it's not in your role, you haven't got enough time, you don't have the capacity, you don't have the bandwidth. If you say no, again, this is up to you. You can say no. You could perhaps suggest alternatives to that person asking you to do something. So you could say, I can't do this. It's not within my bandwidth. I finish work at 5. I suggest that you ask someone else, or here's something I had done previously. Perhaps you can look at this document and it will help you. You can suggest alternatives, and that is being flexible in your boundaries. So you can say no and just leave them to it, or you can offer an alternative to them if that is your working environment, if that's your space and place. Again, hope that makes sense. Now, when it comes to setting boundaries, if you're not particularly confident in yourself, it's likely that you won't stick to those boundaries. So it's really important to do that inner work of what you can do to become more confident. Now, I can't tell you because I don't know each of your situations, but that inner work, what does it look like? And I'll ask you some questions at the end to help you, to guide you to where you might be able to get more help or support, whether it's a course, a free course, a paid course, a book, or something like that. You can start asking yourself questions and doing something around that space. But it's really important to do that inner work. You've got to define your self-worth. If you have a low self-confidence or lack of self-esteem, then you're more likely to allow people to overstep your boundaries, or you're more likely not to even know your own boundaries. So it's important to build your confidence, and especially when it comes to your career, and with your family and friends, to be more confident in saying that's not acceptable. I don't accept that. This is where my boundary lies. I'm saying no. So it's up to you to build your confidence so that you have the strength and the knowledge in how to say no. And again, this is part of your value. Your importance comes from yourself. So if you're going to set your boundaries, it's important for you to have that sense of self. And I know sense of self is such a huge space, but again, we're all different. If you are being taken advantage of, if you are constantly saying yes, or people pleasing, or doing things around that space, what do you need to do to become more confident to assert yourself? Do the beliefs you hold stop you from putting your boundaries in place? Perhaps you believe that because it's my family, I've got to do what they say. I don't know. Perhaps you believe that it's my boss, so I must do what he says. Perhaps you say, you believe that it's my friend, I've known he or she for 30 years, I'm going to do whatever they ask me to do. But if sometimes your beliefs can hold you back in setting your boundaries, so it's quite important to have a look at what your beliefs are and your values, and if they're holding you back from being strong in your boundaries. And if you recognize anything, what can you do differently? Once you start drilling down into these questions, what can you start doing differently? If you're a people pleaser, I just mentioned that lack of self-confidence or low self-esteem. So often, many of my friends, my family, the people I work with in terms of the workshops, some of the questions come out about the feeling accepted and people pleasing. Sometimes my clients as well. This comes up in lots of different conversations. So they're all quite common. I always say that most people actually have the same problems. So if you're a people pleaser and you are constantly, well, you haven't set your boundaries, number one, because you're a people pleaser. So you're constantly saying and doing things because you don't want to feel, left out, because you're worried about what people will say. You're worried about what people will think. These are the types of things that you'll hear. Will they be annoyed? Will they like me? What will they say? Will they reject me? What will they think? You're outside of yourself and you're placing more importance on that person or those people rather than your own values and your own boundaries. And this can happen when you don't have enough confidence, you've got low self-esteem, you have a desperate need for acceptance. Sometimes you might have a fear of missing out. And this can sometimes come from childhood conditioning, that something happened to you as a child, and then you've brought that through into your adulthood. It could have been a teacher saying something to you, a parent saying something to you, a sibling, or another child. I feel like I'm going to sneeze. So, these are the types of things that can stop you from setting your boundaries. And again, I can't go into hefty detail here. I was going to sneeze. Right, I've muted myself so I could sneeze. So I thought there was a question there. So Yeah, so the child could, these are some of the causes that will support or stop you from building your installing your boundaries, this people pleasing space. So it's quite important to get to the heart of what's going on for you, and each of us will have different areas that we need to work on. Not setting your boundaries can be quite harmful, because you end up doing things that you don't want to do, you don't like doing, and you don't have the energy for. And when you keep doing things like this, you'll become quite resentful, and it's exhausting, and it can be stressful. So these are, again, reasons why having your boundaries in place, or knowing what your boundaries are, is important. So knowing what they are first, and then what can you do to make sure you install them. And you might not know what they are because you've been saying yes for so long. You've been doing more than your fair share for so long. You might not even know what your boundaries are because you haven't done any work on them. So I'll ask you a few questions just in a second, just to help you to get started. Now, the power of no is important. Sometimes people feel uncomfortable because of the people pleasing, because of you've been saying yes for so long. It feels uncomfortable. It only feels uncomfortable because it's new and because it's different. Once you start practicing it, you will start feeling a better self, a sense of empowerment. You'll feel more strength. And in actual fact, people will respect you. They may not like it to begin with, or they might think, oh, what's happening here? But they will eventually respect you because you'll stick. They'll know where they stand with you, because you're saying no. And if you need to communicate why you're saying no, or communicate why you're doing something differently, because if you've been doing it for quite some time, that would have been an agreed expectation. So it can be quite important to say no and explain why. Again, the reasons are optional. You need to know your situation and the conversation and the relationship that you have with that person or those people. But notice how you feel when you start saying no, because quite often I get this story quite often as well. People say, yes, I'll do something, and then they spend all that time going, why did I say yes to this? Going to a party, go to the party, and then it's really I don't want to be here. Why did I say yes to this? And they get home and they're like, that's 2, 3, 4 hours of my life that I can't get back, that I've wasted, that I could have been doing something else. So notice how you feel when you start saying no, or notice how you feel when you start doing things on your terms rather than on someone else's. So that no can mean different things, but notice how you start feeling. You'll start feeling stronger, you'll start feeling more confident, you'll start feeling more empowered. So practice saying no. It will feel a little bit uncomfortable to begin with if you've been saying yes all the time, or you've been doing things all the time, but start practicing and it will soon become a new habit. And notice how that makes you feel. If it really still makes you feel uncomfortable, then check in with why you feel uncomfortable. Is it guilt? Remember, it's a useless emotion. Is it a genuine, I want to help that person? Then you can maybe be a bit more flexible, but notice how you feel and check in with that. So to begin, these are the questions. And I think this is really important. So take a screenshot. What am I tolerating? So what are the things that you're putting up with that every time you do it, or every time you are asked to do it, it really annoys you? What am I accepting? Again, what am I not able to say, no, I don't want to do that anymore. I've been doing it, but I don't want to do it anymore. What are you accepting? So accepting and tolerating are probably similar and in the area. And then ask yourself, what can I do differently? What can I do to take a little bit of control back? What can I do to empower myself? I thought this was a really funny picture because I see people dressing up their dogs in all sorts of funny things. And the poor dogs, they're like, why am I accepting this? So I thought that was a bit of fun. But, think about what you're accepting. What do you feel that you're not able to say, I'm no longer going to do that? I'm saying no. So you reclaim your power of no. So do this exercise. It's a really good one just to start you off. And it really does make a difference. Once you make that list of what you're tolerating, what you're accepting, I don't know, maybe a family member asks you to do something. Maybe your partner is always asking you to do something. Maybe they don't do the washing up. Something at work, maybe they constantly give you something at 6 o'clock on a Friday and expect it back on Monday morning at 9:30. What are you tolerating? What are you not able to stand up for yourself with? What can you do differently? How can you empower yourself? And if you get stuck on setting your boundaries, go back to events or things that you've done recently or in the past where you've said yes, or you've done something and you've absolutely thought, why on earth am I doing this? Why on earth did I do it? So if you can't set your boundaries going forward, use previous events and situations. Start looking at the things that you say yes to, start looking at the things that you're doing, start looking at how you overcommit, start looking at your people pleasing, how you do things, how you are the organizer, or you always fix things, you get things sorted out. Are you the main woman or the main man? So use previous events and situations to help you. And is there a theme? Is it because you are a people pleaser? Is it because you feel guilty? Is it because you don't know how to say no? Do you need help? Do you need guidance in saying no? Are you committed to your family? Maybe is it because you feel bad because it's your family? Just look back at the things that you keep getting caught up in and start from there, and make a list of the things that you're no longer willing to accept in order to help and set your boundaries. Each day is the opportunity to make the best choice for yourself. And sometimes we get caught up in work, family, friends, doing things, COVID, pandemic, worry, anxiety. But each day, it's like a reset. So each day is the opportunity to make the best choice for yourself. And that is definitely certain when it comes to setting your boundaries. So if you want to get in touch with me, I am here at your service. There's my contact details. I don't know who else has joined us. I'll also share a link if you want to have a private conversation with me, one-to-one, that's complimentary. If you want to work with me, that's also possible. And I'm just going to come up to the Q&A. Oops, we've got someone who's unmuted themselves, and I'm going to stop the recording.